Blackbeard might have a mythical Zoan fruit, and by the end of the series, his powers might be so broken that he can control the seas themselves. Big spoiler warning if you haven't caught up with the manga yet, but the last few chapters of One Piece were a complete game changer, and that's putting it lightly. So if you haven't caught up yet, go ahead and click off this video and spend some quality time on this, and we'll see you back here soon. Okay, but now with that out of the way, today we're making the bittersweet decision that it might be time to retire some of our favorite Blackbeard Devil Fruit theories from throughout the years. Goodbye Cerberus, goodbye to the three brothers, goodbye even to the Kraken. Because given the big reveal of Luffy's Zoan Devil Fruit, a much more interesting option has now opened up to us. That Teach, just like Luffy, has potentially also eaten a mythical Zoan Devil Fruit. The 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚡 model moon god, I guess really the jury's still out on what Oda's exactly going to call that one. There's no telling what he will decide to name the moon god of the One Piece world, but since sun god Nika is an original creation and not directly borrowed from any mythology in particular, it's unlikely we'll see a 𝚲𝚘𝚎𝚘𝚗 or Artemis fruit anytime soon. Instead, just like Nika, Blackbeard's fruit will probably also be based on a god unique to One Piece, merging different cultural ideas. What's up, Amano, and today we're talking about Marshal D. Teach and the secret identity of the Yami Yami no Mi. I mean, for years and years, we've theorized about what Blackbeard's Zoan fruit will be. There are just so many threes associated with Teach. His 3 pistols, the 3 skulls on his flag, the 3 claws on the weapon that he used to scar Shanks. So naturally, he'd also have 3 devil fruits. A logia, the Yami Yami no Mi, a paramecia, the Gura Gura no Mi, and a to-be-determined Zoan fruit. We thought for sure that this was hinting towards a Cerberus with its 3 heads, or a Kraken with its 3 hearts, or something along those lines. Maybe Blackbeard jumping in and getting Kaido's Devil Fruit. And while all of these are of course still legitimate possibilities, we have now to welcome a new theory to the club as well that a lot of people have been talking about. And obviously I have to throw in my thoughts on this as well, so here we go. So why do we suddenly think that he actually has a moon god fruit? Well, because Luffy has the sun god fruit, of course. Luffy and Blackbeard have always been opposites. Throughout the story, they have always paralleled and mirrored each other. And so, if Luffy is the sun, as you will see, it only makes sense that Blackbeard is the moon, the 2 most common reoccurring symbols in the story. If you need a little further convincing though, here are just a few ways that these 2 characters counter each other. Luffy has rubber properties which can insulate perfectly against the earthquakes that Blackbeard can produce. Even though the Quake fruit is considered the strongest paramecia with enough power to destroy the entire world, Luffy has a built-in immunity against it, just like he did with Enel's lightning fruit, and his awakening can technically insulate everything around him as well. And now, if Luffy's a sun god, which could explain his strange ability to produce flames, this runs counter to Blackbeard's darkness fruit. Those flames are literally light against the darkness. Now, it is not just their powers though that are opposites. The parallel between these 2 characters run much deeper than that and are ingrained in the characters themselves to their basic fundamental character level. Luffy is the warrior of liberation. He brings freedom to the people he meets on every single island. Blackbeard, on the other hand, leaves a path of devastation behind him wherever he goes. The very first time we learned about Blackbeard was on Drum Island, and he and his crew scared off Walpole and his legion of doctors, but also left the villagers in fear and turmoil. However, after the Straw Hats visit Drum Island, they liberate the people from Walpole's oppressive rule and leave it as a fresh, new, and free kingdom. They also acquired one bonus cotton candy loving reindeer mascot on top. We also see Luffy and Blackbeard as clear opposites in the way that they attract their crewmates. Both Luffy and Blackbeard brought freedom to their crew in a sense. Zoro was literally released from a stockade, Nami from Arlong's clutches, and Robin from the likes of Crocodile and later CP9. And even the Straw Hats that weren't freed from a literal imprisonment, they were freed from a figurative prison. Usopp, Sanji, and many others were lifted from their ordinary lives and obligations. Luffy was the one who enabled them to travel the world in pursuit of their dreams. He's someone who gathers strength from his crewmates and depends on them, but also allows them to chase their own goals and find their own sense of fulfillment. And yes, Blackbeard also frees many of his crewmates from Impel Down, but it's more so that they can serve his interests, not so they can live out their own dreams. Which for most of the level 5 prisoners, you know, is probably just murder, actually. So maybe Pizarro does feel a deep sense of fulfillment after all. Even the way that Luffy and Blackbeard received their devil fruits are clear opposites. Luffy's 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚎𝚛 no Mi model Nika almost seemed to seek out Luffy specifically. The Gorosei describe it evading the world government for 800 years as if the fruit has had a will of its own. It really seems like Luffy was actively chosen by the fruit to carry on the will of Joy Boy and Sun God Nika. And so contrast this with Blackbeard, who was on the hunt for the Yami Yami no Mi and murdered his own crewmate Thatch in order to obtain its powers. He also killed his former captain Whitebeard in order to take his fruit as well. He wasn't so much chosen by the fruit as he sought out that fruit at any moral cost. Luffy just innocently taking a bit out of Shanks' treasure just doesn't give the same vibe as cold-blooded killing. I'd go so far as to say they give off the exact opposite vibes actually. And so, as you can see, in so many ways, Luffy and Blackbeard, while the same in many ways, are also diametrically opposed in so many others. Blackbeard being the true foil to Luffy's main character. And so, therefore, if Luffy is the sun, it makes sense that Blackbeard would be the moon. Now obviously the moon is very important to One Piece as a whole, as you know. If the Sun God Nika fruit was foreshadowed even from the first chapter being titled Romance Dawn and from other clues like the Straw Hat ship being called 1000 Sunny, then you'd think that there would be a moon god too, with how prominent the moon is overall in the story here. And so here are just a few of the ways that the moon features heavily in the series. Enel's entire goal was to sail the Arc Maxime up to the endless landmass that was the Fairyworth. And in his cover story, we found that not only are there space pirates kicking it on the moon, but there are also many archaeological clues that the winged rays from the Sky Islands actually originally came from the moon. In the library of Ohara, we see a planetary model that shows the One Piece world having multiple moons. The Minks transform into their powerful Zulong forms in the light of the full moon, and the surnames of the Wano clans also contain the kanji for moon. For instance, Kozuki means light moon, Shimotsuki means frost moon, and so on and so forth. And the moon isn't just important for One Piece as a whole either, it also seems to hold specific significance for Marshall D. Teach himself. For instance, when Eiichiro Oda drew Blackbeard as a child, we see him sitting and crying with a crescent moon hanging in the sky above him. Plus, we do know that Blackbeard never sleeps. I mean, bruh, this man really needs to try some melatonin. This insomnia is probably even worse than mine. Maybe he too is just too much of a coffee lover. Or maybe a moon god is naturally active and alert at night? Would make sense, I guess. Okay, so we've established that due to the parallels between Blackbeard and Luffy, he probably possesses a moon god devil fruit. However, what exactly does that mean? What abilities could a moon god actually have? Well, in the same way that you would expect a sun god to be made out of rubber, what can Blackbeard do with his fruit? Sure, he already has the wildly strong mastery of earthquakes and darkness, but in the same way that Luffy's new power is broken, ruled by his imagination and the boundlessness of cartoon logic, what borderline unstoppable powers should we expect from Blackbeard moving forward? Now, as I've said before, many people, including me, just assumed that Blackbeard will still have to acquire a mythical Zoan fruit later on. But as with the Cerberus or the Kraken fruit, I think it's much more likely that, just like Luffy, he's had his mythical Zoan fruit all along. In the same way that what Luffy thought was the Gomu Gomu no Mi was actually the Hito Hito no Mi model Sun God Nika, Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi might actually be the Moon God fruit. This would of course play wonderfully into the opposites once again. Luffy thought he was a Paramecia, but was a Zoan. Well, Blackbeard says he's a Logia, but he is actually a Zoan as well. And so while Luffy was totally ignorant of his own fruit and his powers, and honestly still is, Blackbeard might very well be aware of this secret, but actively makes other people ignorant of the true nature of his abilities. The mythical Zoan fruit, Hito Hito no Mi, model Moon God. Wow, we really need Oda to give us the name for this fruit soon so we know what to call it. Anyway, the Yami Yami no Mi actually being the Moon God fruit makes a lot of sense, I think. When Blackbeard fights Ace, Ace actually comments that Blackbeard's fruit doesn't feel like a Logia. And you could call Ace something of an expert here, wielding the Mera Mera no Mi. It does make sense too, because Blackbeard doesn't turn into or generate darkness. He's different from every other Logia fruit user we've met so far. Instead, the darkness fruit demonstrates really strange powers. He sucks things in with a power that's much more like gravity than darkness. He can negate someone else's devil fruit powers when he makes contact with them. Again, not something that logically makes sense or has anything to do with darkness. He's also able to amplify the physical damage that he himself takes. None of these really make sense for a darkness fruit. But it could be very much explained by the mysterious properties of a mythical Zoan devil fruit. It's similar to how Luffy's powers didn't make sense for a rubber fruit, generating flames with Red Hawk, changing directions with the Jet Culverine, and even things as basic as Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd don't really make sense without a big heap of anime logic. But in addition to what Blackbeard can already do, just like Luffy's awakening unlocked a whole host of new abilities, we will probably get some wild new powers once the truth of Blackbeard's fruit is fully revealed. One of those powers, hitting the subscribe button. But what else could a Moon God possibly do? Well, we do know that Oda takes a ton of inspiration from mythologies all around the world, so maybe some of the lunar deities from across the globe can give us some hints. The main Egyptian moon god is Khonsu, but I'll leave that to Oscar Isaac to explain that one. However, the Egyptian god Thoth is also connected to the moon, as well as being a god of wisdom and knowledge. And while Blackbeard certainly possesses a lot of secret knowledge, this doesn't scream power up necessarily. The Greek moon goddess, such as Artemis, are often associated with the hunt. Again, Blackbeard doesn't seem connected to hunting or wild animals, but we do see his crew hunting down powerful devil fruits like Jesus Burgess did in Dressrosa. Another Greek moon god, Selene, has the power over illusions. And while Blackbeard himself again doesn't have this power himself, his crewmate Shiryu and Katarina Devon use illusions in the form of invisibility and shapeshifting. Also, across many cultures, lunar deities are also closely connected to childbirth, but I hope for all of our sakes that Blackbeard's power is not connected to that, because Teach is the last person I would want to see in the maternity ward, honestly. Now, of course, with One Piece being a manga, we can't forget about Japanese mythology. In Shintoism, the moon god Tsukuyomi is set in conflict against the sun god Amaterasu. There's not really much to say about any inspiration for powers, but it's worth noting that the conflict between these two gods originated from a fight over food. And that reminds me quite a bit of a certain argument between Luffy and Blackbeard over some giant cherry pies. Now, of course, I'm leaving out one of the most obvious powers associated with the moon though, one that's especially significant given that One Piece is a seafaring adventure. The moon's gravity controls the tides of the oceans. Could the same gravity of the 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢𝚛 fruit control the sea itself? I know, it sounds crazy since water is a devil fruit user's weakness, but it's not unheard of for a devil fruit user to manipulate water indirectly. While they really can't just go for a swim, we do see Aokiji freeze massive tidal waves at Marineford and Charlotte Oven boiling the sea around Whole Cake Islands. And so if Blackbeard could influence tides, then he could easily sink opposing ships and have an advantage in combat over other devil fruit users. He could, for example, also make it extremely difficult to travel to certain islands. In oppositions to Luffy's liberation, he'd basically literally be restricting people's freedom to travel. Could a previous user of the Moon God fruit, or even the original Moon God itself, be responsible for phenomena like the calm belt and the unpredictable weather of the Grand Line? We know that devil fruit awakenings can leave a lasting impact on the world's landscape, just like how Aokiji and Akainu changed Punk Hazard's environment forever. And so it would make total sense if a devil fruit was responsible for the Grand Line itself, and why not one as powerful as a potential Moon God fruit? Since Luffy's fruit is boundless and only limited by its own imagination, he needs a foe that has a similar level of overpoweredness, for lack of a better term. Breaking the taboo between devil fruits and water would be one way for Blackbeard to achieve a borderline broken ability and make for a more than stellar final fight between these two antagonists. Another exciting possibility, aside from control over the oceans, which, let's be honest, is already pretty good, could have to do with Blackbeard's ability to consume multiple devil fruits. This strange power, exclusive to Blackbeard, has yet to be explained, especially with this comment by Marco. We know that in Jiraiya, Luffy and Zoro refer to Blackbeard as them, as if he had multiple identities. So does the Moon God potentially act as its own entity, separate from Teach? Does it have to do with the gravity of pulling things in? Maybe it's yet another opposite of Luffy's abilities. While the Sun God gives freedom and empowerment to others, the Moon God is able to take in more power for itself. Now, so far we've only talked about Blackbeard's powers, but if you really want to understand who Teach truly is and why he's so ridiculously important to the story, you really shouldn't ignore this next video right here where I explain his entire character and the Three Brothers theory as a small cherry on top.